Good morning, folks. Welcome back to the Food for the Faithful channel with your host, Bill Reimer. We're going to deal with using the scientific method today in order that we might become our own detectives in determining why the entire Western world is headed in the same direction. So I have an admonition from the scriptures, from Proverbs chapter 23, beginning with verse 1. When you sit down to dine with a ruler, consider carefully what is before you, and put a knife to your throat. If you are a man of great appetite, do not desire his delicacies, for it is deceptive food. Do not weary yourself to gain wealth. Cease from your consideration of it. When you set your eyes on it, it is gone. For wealth certainly makes itself wings, like an eagle that flies toward the heavens. Do not eat the bread of a selfish man, or desire his delicacies. For as he thinks within himself, so he is. He says to you, eat and drink, but his heart is not with you. You will vomit up the morsel you have eaten, and waste your compliments. That's what the scriptures have to say about our rulers, and that certainly applies to the ones that we have today. Daring as it is to investigate the unknown, even more so it is to question the known. Quote from Kaspar. In my opinion, it is my opinion that we must treat the West today as a crime scene. The scene of the crime are the floors of the legislative bodies all throughout the Western world, and the victims are the citizens whom the ruling elite seek to return to serfdom. Our leaders are portraying the greatest improvement of the human condition as the rape of the planet, and the common person as the despoiler. Since for the first time in human history, all our governments have torn the same page out of a hysterical, dystopian playbook and are using it to forcibly confiscate our freedom and our wealth. One of the purposes of the scientific method of inquiry is to provide a means by which we can analyze the smelly little orthodoxies which contend for our soul. Given the fact that the principal motive of the political class is not to improve society despite all their assurances of promoting social progress, since any real progress is almost invariably a mere byproduct of very few of their actions, but rather to increase their own hold on power, why do the ruled, who are far greater in number, accept this state of tyranny? Machiavelli identified several contrivances employed by the ruling elite to increase their power, including coercion, trickery, subterfuge, the collusion of crony capitalism amounting to fascism, and the self-serving reallocation of capital expropriated by excessive taxation and fiduciary easing. But none of these contrivances alone could effect cementing their rule, nor would it permit them to sink their talons into every cloying aspect of society without the existence of an overarching fallacious narrative. Today this has resulted in the elite promoting quasi-religious, radical, and fanatical ideologies to advance their revolutionary agenda. Note the hysteria around climate change, COVID policies, and the smelly, petty-bourgeois orthodoxy of the religion of diversity, inclusiveness, and equity. As evolutionary psychologist Dr. Gad Saad asserts, at the root of the religion is the unflappable and irrational belief that society must exhibit equality of outcomes on every possible human endeavor. When this cancerous objective is not met, it is presumed that the sole possible explanation is institutionalized bigotry. Of course, people with functioning brains recognize that most complex phenomena are multifactorial in their causes. In other words, a disparity in outcomes is likely caused by a large number of factors, of which institutionalized bigotry might be absent from such a list. For the readers interested in the pernicious effects of the die religion and its attack on the meritocratic ethos, please read The Parasitic Mind, How Infectious Ideas Are Killing Common Sense. End of quote from Dr. Sad. And so, we see how the elite have created an ideological orthodoxy which cannot be questioned. In order to legitimize themselves, the governing class invariably rely on proliferating ideas favorable to their objectives to convince the masses of the necessity of their rule. Or as David Hume wrote, it is therefore on opinion that government is founded. And this maxim extends to the most despotic and most military governments, as well as to the most free and most popular. David Hume, from Essays, Moral, Political, Literary. And this is how an ideologically possessed, power-mad political class have used their revolutionary ideology so that it would become mainstream orthodoxy in order to cement their control over us. And their orthodoxy smells like shit. So, from an article by Dr. Peter Butka called Coordination Problem, the smelly little orthodoxies which are now contending for our souls. Link provided. Dr. Butka is a university professor of economics and philosophy at George Mason University and the director of the F.A. Hayek Program for Advanced Study in Philosophy, Politics, and Economics at the Mercatus Center at George Mason University. Dr. Butka writes, the quote above comes from George Orwell's essay on Charles Dickens. That is the quote about the smelly little orthodoxies. Orwell describes a true liberal as a bold intellect that is equally hated by all those smelly orthodoxies of their day. A person of free intellect who writes openly and without fear, and is generously angry with the prevailing falsehoods of the day. One of the gems from the James Buchanan Archives is a 1982 paper of his that picks up on this Orwell theme and applies it to the experiences he and his colleagues had to face in pursuing the public choice research program in economics and political science. The essay is entitled The Dishwater of Orthodoxies, and he claims that the orthodoxies he faced in methodology of the social sciences, the method of analysis in the social and policy sciences, and implications of that analysis for political economy and social philosophy, while not smelly, was nevertheless dangerous. The reason why the orthodoxies he and his colleagues faced didn't smell is because they weren't alive enough to stink. I'm going to stop reading from this article and just inject a thought there. Now, these toxic ideas that Dr. Gad said spoke of, they're not only stinking, that I cannot bear the smell of them. They have taken over everything, including allowing the Canadian government to come under the full sway of Beijing. Back to the article. Didn't smell because they weren't alive enough to stink. The orthodoxies Buchanan faced were dull, dead, drab, dirty. But as Buchanan is quick to point out, one can drown in dishwater, nevertheless. It is the dull, dead, drab, and dirty dishwasher of social scientific orthodoxy mid-20th century that had to be resisted and effectively drained away, so that the new science of association among free and responsible individuals could be developed. those who held as sacrosanct the efficacy of majoritian democracy, of the necessary efficiency of modern bureaucracy, had to be disabused of their notions. This requires disruptive intellectuals. Those who are comfortable in their academic life don't want to permit the methodological reevaluation required. They resist change and seek to cast out the heretic. But as Buchanan points out, when the only recourse left is dismissive name-calling, this means that the heretic has won because the opposition is out of genuine argument. The genuine innovator, entrepreneur, Buchanan writes, who seeks to challenge, to stir up the dishwater of the orthodoxy, must expect to encounter resistance at every stage. At best, he and his fellow heretics can hope to find academic settings that are temporarily congenial to their efforts, settings that encourage those who dare to be different. That's why people like Dr. Peterson have been driven out of the university, is in danger of losing his license to practice psychology, in spite of the fact that he is arguably the most famous clinical psychologist in the world. The context of this essay is the last Liberty Fund sponsored summer conference in Blacksburg, as Buchanan and his colleagues at the Center of Study of Public Choice had recently decided to leave VPI and relocate at GMU. This is a sort of edge to the essay, but an edge that in the context makes perfect sense. And as with Orwell's description of Dickens, Buchanan is being generously angry and not at all gratuitously angry, and is writing openly, without fear, and embracing his responsibilities as a person of free intelligence. This is the James Buchanan I had as a teacher. Dare to be different was his motto to all of us, but also he made us believe that our job wasn't either to ignore the dishwater, let alone to merely learn to swim in it, but instead to stir it up and to unclog the drain so it could be washed away. As I read these various pieces from the Buchanan collection, I am transported back in time to a young man in his early 20s trying to figure out how to be a professional economist. How amazingly lucky was I that I had James Buchanan, Gordon Tullock, and Kenneth Boulding to learn from. Of course, my other teachers such as Bob Tollison, Karen Vaughan, Victor Vonberg, and of course my advisor Don Lavoie taught me so much. But to have your professor win the Nobel Prize, and then to have the AEA Distinguished Fellow and the second John Bates Clark Medalist reinforce the message that your job was to stir up the dishwater of the orthodoxy and to unclog the drain and wash away the dull, dead, drab, and dirty water away. We never wanted to be like Harvard MIT crowd, because the Harvard MIT crowd constituted the dishwater of the orthodoxy. I am not sure as a teacher I have been able to instill in my students this sense of urgency in challenging the prevailing orthodoxy, especially in more recent years as opposed to my earlier years at GMU and with students from the period of 1998 to 2005. Post-2005, I often wonder if the practical advice about how to exist within a profession defined by the dishwater has been taken as a lesson in swimming rather than stirring things up. If it has, that was a mistake. Reading Buchanan inspires and reminds me of the sense of purpose he instilled in us students. Boulding, as well, taught us about the sheer joy of learning and the urgency of the problems we were attempting to tackle. And Tullock, well, Gordon, his great strength was to suggest complete irreverence for anything established or not established. Dr. Butka continues to write, I hope my students, past, present, and future, are generously angry and willing to stir up the dishwater of the orthodoxy and unclog the drain and wash the dull, dread, drab, and dirty away, and substitute in fresh thinking and methodology, methods of analysis, and bold implications for political economy and social philosophy. There are plenty of smelly little orthodoxies which are now contending for our souls that must be challenged anew by mainline economic thinkers. Well, I suggest that's the end of Dr. Butka's article, brilliantly written, and you can see that his mentors had inspired some very deep philosophical, moral, and scientific ways of assessing social policy. We are currently being sold down the drain by a political class who have created an orthodoxy that is literally insane. It is a mind pathogen. It is up to you and to me to challenge it. Now, I'm trying to do my part by operating this blog and podcast. I need you to share these ideas. Challenge your family and your friends. Speak to strangers on the street, and certainly write your politicians and demand accountability. Right now we have a parliament that is refusing to review the insipid, the vile and filthy influence that Beijing has over the Trudeau government. It's time to pray like we've never prayed before, but also to act. Don't be so heavenly minded you are not of any earthly value. Stir the shit up. God bless you. Have a great day. I'm so ticked off.